Well, good afternoon. This is George Yates, and we're here with Justice for All, and it's a lovely afternoon out there. And welcome to the show. Every week we interview some exciting guests that are experts in various fields that are really of interest to me. That's the whole purpose behind this show. What's fascinating lately, we've had some revelations this week about, torture from the CIA. In the last year or so, we've had revelations of NSA spying, and it seems like every week or month there's some new bombshell dropped about things that are going on the United States government is doing that we really don't know a lot about. This week we have with us Professor Francis Boyle. He's an international law professor at the University of Illinois, and his resume goes on for so long that I don't even know where to start. He's one of the most impressive academics that I've ever had the pleasure to interview. He's with us today. How are you, Professor Boyle?
Well, thank you very much for having me on, George. My best to your listening audience, and always happy to talk to a fellow attorney.
Well, that's great. Listen, Francis Boyle, Professor Boyle, is an expert in biowarfare. He's also an expert in nuclear weapons. He's an international law professor. I've looked at your resume. You have lectured on Libya. You're an expert on the Palestinians and Israel. But today, I think we're talking mostly about your experience with biowarfare. Last year we had this whole blow up over Syria and the chemical weapons that are being used by Assad on his people, and you actually wrote you drafted the United States Biological Weapons Anti-Terrorism Act of 1989, and you're an expert on biological weapons, and you're the author of Biowarfare and Terrorism, which was published in 2002. And just tell us, Professor, your book from 2002, I think, has become more and more relevant, lately. And I'd like you to tell our listeners how biowarfare is in the forefront of our thoughts today and what's going on in the world.
Right, George. Well, yes, technically, I drafted the Biological Weapons Anti-Terrorism Act of 1989 that was passed unanimously by both houses of the United States Congress, which I'm sure you know is not easy to do, and then signed into law by President George Bush Sr. I'm a political independent myself, so I work with people of all political parties of good faith and goodwill, and it is the current implementing legislation for the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention that the U.S. became a party to in 1974. And it was, the impetus for it was that, unfortunately, under President Reagan, his neoconservative operatives that he brought in there with him and put in the Pentagon decided to get into researching development testing using DNA genetic engineering for biological weapons, and got engaged in research, development, testing of every type of exotic disease you could possibly imagine for weapons purposes. I'm not saying President Reagan himself really knew what was going on, but as you know, these neocons are pretty nefarious, in my opinion. And so when this came to light, I made a call. I was asked to brief Congress on this matter. I work with a group called Council for Responsible Genetics, headquartered in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we have some of the top life scientists in the world there, Harvard, MIT, Sloan Kettering, you name it. And that's what led to they're saying, fine, draft it, and then we'll help lobby it through Congress. The Reagan administration fought us tooth and nail on this because they knew my legislation was going directly against what they were trying to do there at the Pentagon. But when Reagan went out and Bush Sr. came in, as you know, Bush Sr., moderate establishment Republican, got rid of all the neoconservatives, and all opposition to our legislation disappeared immediately, and we were simply left negotiating 2 points. I'm a lifelong opponent of the death penalty, so I only would put in life imprisonment in there. And there were people in the Department of Justice that wanted the death penalty, and I opposed it. On the other hand, the FBI wanted automatic wiretapping provisions in there. And again, I'm a civil libertarian myself. I oppose that. But at the end of the day, I made a compromise, keeping out the death penalty and going along with the wiretapping, figuring the FBI was going to wiretap anyway. Well, as you know, now with the NSA, everything's being intercepted and wiretapped. So that was the legislation, and to his credit, both houses of Congress passed it unanimously. Bush Sr. Signed it. I was invited to the signing ceremony in the White House, but then Gorbachev came to town, so they canceled the signing ceremony. My wife was kind of disappointed since she's a Republican and a lawyer, but there you go.
Well, are we engaged go ahead.
Yeah, well, in any event, it really sort of wound down until, and again, I'm trying to be fair here, in his second term, Bill Clinton was influenced by his Secretary of the Navy, a guy named Richard Danzig, whom I knew when I interviewed at Yale Law School. He was an assistant professor there at that time, and later went to work for President Carter. And he then convinced Clinton to get back in a big way with this dual-use offensive, defensive, DNA, genetic engineering research on biological weapons. And then, as you know, after 9/11/2001, everyone went wild because of the anthrax attacks. And as of today, to make a long story short, since 9/11/2001, we have spent $79 billion on biological warfare work. Now, George, to put that into perspective, in constant dollars, that's almost twice what we spent to develop the atom bomb during the Manhattan Project in World War II. We have close to 14,000 alleged life scientists doing what I can only call Dr. Mengele-type death science work, and we have close to 1,500 laboratories now doing this type of work. It's extremely dangerous. Even putting aside what I think are the serious legal compliance problems with both the Biological Weapons Convention and my Biological Weapons Anti-Terrorism Act, which, by the way, is still on the books today.
Is this research that's going on under the auspices of what department is it happening?
Right. Well, George, back under Reagan, it only happened under the Department of Defense, and of course, some was going on under the CIA, but that was kind of hard to figure out. After 9/11/2001, the whole government's involved in biowarfare work. We're talking the Pentagon, the CIA, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, NIAID, etc., National Cancer Institute. There's so much money in it that everyone's going for, and they've all been bought off to do this type of work that is, in my opinion, completely unnecessary, dangerous, counterproductive. And we've had numerous instances of biowarfare agents escaping from these labs over the years. Certainly here in the United States, that's been documented now by hearings in Congress. There's a big article in USA Today that came out this summer documenting some of these. So as I've said, there was a documentary, if you're interested in, by Eric Nadler, the brother of Congressman Gerald Nadler, called Anthrax War, which I said that this is a catastrophe waiting to happen, and I'm afraid this is what has happened in West Africa with the Ebola epidemic there.
Well, tell us about that, because I think that's what brought us to this show today. I had two questions. What do we have to show for this $79 billion on biowarfare? What do we intend to do with it? What's the purpose of this biowarfare research? And third, what has this got to do with Ebola and the CDC?
Right, George. Well, first, for the $79 billion that we've spent since, and I'm not counting up the billions that Reagan spent before that, or Clinton. It was small potatoes compared to this. And by the way, Obama has asked for another $6.2 billion on top of that, plus another $6 billion normally budgeted for next year. So now we're talking about $91 billion at least that we know of. So what we've gotten for it is absolutely nothing, because as you saw, George, once Ebola hit in Dallas, there was total pandemonium all over the country that nothing had been prepared for. And indeed, the reason we allegedly were spending the $79 billion starting in 9/11/2001 until this year, the alleged reason was to prepare precisely for something like this, and Ebola was at the top of the list that we were supposed to be preparing for. And yet, as you see with the total confusion, pandemonium coming out of the White House, CDC, and everywhere else, Department of Health and Human Services, no preparations at all were made, none. And everyone admitted that. So where did our $79 billion go? I think most of it was stolen, between you and me, by all these life science researchers engaging in this Dr. Mengele type of research that is extremely dangerous for all of us, that has escaped from these labs, and just using it to pad their own bank accounts. We saw no evidence at all of $79 billion spent to protect the American people, which was the alleged purpose why they were spending the $79 billion. And I think your listeners can understand that. Just see what the reaction to Ebola. No one was prepared for anything after $79 billion. Now, as for Ebola, my professional conclusion, and by the way, we've been engaged in research, developing, testing Ebola going back to Reagan. We've been doing this type of dual-use DNA genetic engineering work with Ebola since those days, at least. Indeed, going back to when it was first identified in Zaire, back in 1976, the WHO first ordered it to be shipped to Britain, to Porton Down, which is their equivalent to Fort Detrick. I think, obviously, for weapons-related purposes. Why else do you send it to Porton Down? And then they shipped it from there to the Center for Disease Control. Now, we think the Center for Disease Control are the good guys, and I used to think that was the case. But eventually it came out, and this was in congressional hearings chaired by, I believe, Senator Jay Rockefeller. I have the citations there in my book, that during the Reagan administration, the Reagan neocons ordered the Center for Disease Control and the American Type Culture Collection, which is a big scientific center where researchers get germs for what is supposed to be scientific research. They ordered these two agencies to send 40 shipments of weapons-specific biological agents to Saddam Hussein in Iraq, knowing full well that he was going to weaponize them and figuring he would use them against Iran. Well, unfortunately, what happened was during Gulf War I, there was blowback that these biological weapons that Saddam Hussein had developed, thanks to the Center for Disease Control and American Type Culture Collection, they were blown up unknowingly by U.S. troops over in Iraq, along with all the chemical weapons and things of this nature. And this had a significant role to play in the Gulf War syndrome that still afflicts U.S. military forces that did serve in Gulf War I under Bush Sr. Now, these were not the only factors. You also had experimental vaccines for anthrax and botulin, and indeed that's why they gave them. Cheney ordered them to U.S. troops to get these experimental vaccines in violation of the Nuremberg Code on Medical Experimentation, because Cheney knew we had given Saddam Hussein these biological weapons. So everything blew back on our own forces, and we have Gulf War syndrome today. The last I read, maybe 11,000 U.S. Soldiers have died, and hundreds of thousands have applied for disability, and the Pentagon will still tell you it's in your head. Now, to get to Ebola, we have a long history of doing biological warfare work in West Africa. I have an official government document here, the Pentagon's Biological Defense Research Program, May 1988. Let me repeat that, May 1988, stating quite clearly on page A3, Appendix 3-page 4, that the Centers for Disease Control was doing biological warfare work for the Pentagon as early as 1988 in Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone, which is now the epicenter of the Ebola epidemic on West Africa. Likewise, Columbia University, as early as 1988, was doing biological warfare work for the Pentagon in Liberia, which is another area of terrible Ebola outbreak now. It turns out that the United States government has a long history, and by here I mean at this point the Pentagon, but the Pentagon then subcontracting out to other government agencies, universities. Universities, they're just as guilty as anyone else. Professors, I hate to say it, are just as greedy as everyone else. They're not saints. To do this biowarfare work and basically offshore it. For example, one of the reasons we were doing it in Liberia, Liberia has always been pretty much a de facto colony of the United States, and it turns out Liberia was never a party to the Biological Weapons Convention. So we were outsourcing this type of illegal, dangerous biowarfare work to Liberia. Likewise, we still had one of these labs in Guinea, another epicenter for the Ebola. Well, it turns out Guinea is not a party to the Biological Weapons Convention at all. Sierra Leone is a party, but, that's a former British colony. So I don't think anyone was paying any attention to anything we were doing there at a lab in Sierra Leone. If you look at the CDC has a map, and if you are interested, my colleague friend David Lindorf, who's a well-known investigative reporter, when I gave him this interview, then did a fact check on what I was telling him, and he pulled up the map and everything else. We had 3 biowarfare labs in West Africa, in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. Now, the one in Sierra Leone, Kenema, it appears to be that's the real ground zero here of the outbreak. And that's, I think, where this really came from, although there could have been something also going on in Liberia as well.
So
now,
are you saying then that we've tried to, or that we've been in the process of weaponizing Ebola over the years, and that we had labs in Sierra Leone and in Guinea and in Liberia, and that we were trying to weaponize, or we had labs there weaponizing Ebola, and that it somehow escaped and caused this new outbreak of Ebola in those countries which has been spread? Is that what we're talking about?
Question, and let me, we're both lawyers, so let me provide or try to provide as precise an answer as I can to your question, George. We know that Fort Detrick, the government's Biowarfare Center, has been engaged in weaponizing Ebola. The tip-off there was that they have, it's already been reported, Fort Detrick aerosolized Ebola, that is, made it delivered by air. And that's always been one of the tip-offs of a weapons program, to aerosolize an agent. And I've read some of these contracts before they were all classified. Now, what was going on in West Africa at Kenema, it's very hard to figure out, George, because there are so many levels here of classification in this research. Before 9/11/2001, there was a lot in the public record. Now it's very hard to get a hold of precisely what is going on. But what I have been able to assemble from the public record is this. The United States government has been engaged in what even the White House called dual-use research for biological weapons agents. And dual use means both offensive and defensive at the same time. And the way it works is this. Some life scientists will say, well, gee, I think biological agent X could be at some point in time a threat to the United States. And therefore, I'm going to weaponize biological agent X, and then once I've weaponized it, I'm going to produce a vaccine to neutralize it. That's why it's called dual-use research. And as far as I can figure out, just with respect to Ebola, and not talking about any of the other horrible types of dual-use research that different agencies, the United States government has been involved in using DNA genetic engineering going back to Reagan and his neocons. I have identified 3 different types of research here, dual-use research on Ebola. First, mating the cold with Ebola. That's at the National Institutes of Health. Second, mating the flu with Ebola. And that's at the University of Wisconsin. So notice, and even the White House called that dual use. In other words, what the researcher would do there at the University of Wisconsin, mate the 2 of them together, the flu with Ebola as a weapon, and then allegedly develop a vaccine for it. And by the way, that research has been funded by the National Institutes of Health and the Center for Disease Control, even though the White House itself has called it dual use. And the same researcher at the University of Wisconsin resurrected the Spanish flu virus of 1918 on behalf of the Pentagon and the biowarriors at the Pentagon. So, this is extremely dangerous business here. And then the third agent I've been able to, detect by, researching the public record is down at the University of Texas at Galveston, a life scientist there by the name of Giesbert, and he mated the hoof and mouth disease with Ebola. So we've got three different types of weaponized Ebolas here. The first I call Colbola, the second I call Flubola, and the third the hoof and mouth Ebola.
Now, why do they mate them? What's the purpose of mating them? Putting them together. Why? I mean, Ebola. But it looks like Ebola all by itself kills people, right? I mean, if you're trying to create a weapon with it, these flus don't necessarily kill people, do they? So, are you creating a more resistant strain?
Right. Well, it makes it more contagious, right?
Okay.
I mean, yeah, Ebola is pretty dangerous. Going back when in Zaire, but prior to West Africa, all Ebola outbreaks were eventually contained, with a few hundred deaths at most. Some of them. This one is certainly not contained. It's up to at least 5,000 deaths now, and it could be more. So this, in my opinion, my professional opinion, this work is being done to weaponize Ebola as a tool and technique of biological warfare.
But apparently we haven't got any cures for this type of Ebola, right? I mean, even though it's been apparently worked on by these various labs in Wisconsin and so on, this new strain of Ebola is resistant to any current cures?
So far it is, yes. Although, you see, then the three different teams of researchers involved, after they had weaponized it, these three different variants, then proceeded to say, okay, now I am going to develop a vaccine for the biowarfare agent I just weaponized. And right. So those vaccines are the experimental vaccines that you're now hearing about in the news media, ZMapp and some of these, the one that President Obama was just after the National Institutes of Health for that one. But to go back then to Kinema in Sierra Leone, of the three variants, it seems to me what happened, George, and I'm just trying to connect the dots. One of these experimental vaccines was probably being tested out under the guise of some other type of vaccine over there. The problem is these experimental vaccines have in them a live Ebola gene. So they can actually give people Ebola. And I believe that one of these variants of the three was what was happening at Kinema. Indeed, the Ministry of Health of Sierra Leone put out a statement, which was on their website, I don't know if it's there anymore, saying they were shutting down this lab at Kinema because of the vaccines that were being administered out of these labs, and that in their opinion it set off the Ebola epidemic. So my best surmise is that the epidemic was set off by these experimental vaccines in Sierra Leone and perhaps Liberia as well, coming out of the U.S. government labs that we do have for biowarfare purposes, or did have, in Sierra Leone and Liberia. Now, of the three candidates, Colbola, Flubola, hoof and mouth Ebola, I think the most likely is by Giesbert because he was on the masthead there at Kinema, at that lab that they had. So it could have been that they were testing out his experimental vaccine after he had already weaponized hoof and mouth Ebola in Galveston, and then decided, well, you can't really use a biological weapon unless you have a vaccine to protect your own people. So it's a two-stage process. You need the weapon, then you need the vaccine You also need a delivery device. That's for Dietrich aerosolizing Ebola. So you put all three of them together, and then you can engage in biological warfare if you want to. I believe, for example, if you study official U.S. government documents, we are already at a position to do this with anthrax if we want to. And that's why all U.S. military forces have been forced to take anthrax vaccines.
So you're saying this was a vaccine that got loose. They were trying to vaccinate some. Were they using a test subject or?
Right. This was a test. This was an experimental vaccine. In my opinion, this was I'm not saying they deliberately set out to murder these people as a technique of genocide because they were black. No, what I am saying, and again, trying to be precise here, George, because you're a lawyer. I believe these experimental vaccines for Ebola were being tried out in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and we also right now, GlaxoSmithKline, involved in another one of these vaccines, is doing the same thing right now in Guinea. And the problem with these experimental vaccines is they all have in them live Ebola. And so they've been enhanced, and they've been made more contagious than the original Zaire Ebola was.
So who did they get to take this vaccine? Did you think somebody was duped into taking it, or did they? Over there in Africa, they probably told people, oh well, this is a measles vaccine or a mumps vaccine or something like that. There's a long history of Western pharmaceuticals doing this in Africa, testing out experimental vaccines on Africans and not telling them what's really in the vaccines. Right. Right. Well, now, how have you? This is quite a charge, and how far have you been able to take this as far as evidence and running down this hypothetical as to how this Ebola outbreak began? What have you done with your information or with your, let's say, you're surmising as to how this all started? Have you taken this public? Have there been any calls for investigations? Have there been any more investigations? Have there been any journalists or any other people that have followed up on this to provide any evidence to support this?
Right, George. Well, I sort of run my own biological warfare list of experts that deal in this area. So I've been trying to post my commentaries and analysis from the public record there, and then as time has gone on, some journalists have interviewed me, so I've added them on there. If you do a Google search under my name on this, my viewpoints on it are all over the internet and have been translated into French and Greek, and they're all over Africa, everywhere. But the Western mainstream news media just will not report on it. We've tried. I work with a group called Institute for Public Accuracy there in Washington, D.C., and we put out at least 2 different press releases over a period of 3 weeks that goes out to 7,000, 8,000 news media sources all over. And none of the U.S. Western news media sources would touch this with a 10-foot pole. The same thing happened after the anthrax attacks in October of 2001, George. I was the first person publicly to state that anthrax that attacked the United States Congress and shut down the Congress and also killed those people and attacked the news media was super weapons grade anthrax, 1 trillion spores per gram with a special silicon coating that allowed it to float in the air for delivery purposes as a weapon. I said this could only have been made by a United States governmental agency and at a special biosafety lab for facility. And I said that originally there was a conference at Harvard. I was running a panel on biological warfare. That was November 1 or 3, 2001, and Fox News was there. I said that. And then my friend and colleague, Professor Jonathan King at MIT, who runs their electron microscope lab, said the same thing independently of me. And then I gave an interview to the BBC and then Pacifica Radio Network, and then it died. That was it. Although, as you know, years later, eventually it did come out that the anthrax went back to Fort Detrick to begin with. But that's only part of the story. So there's been total silence, too, on the U.S. government origins of the anthrax attack. And I do discuss that in my book as well, the evidence I had up until then. Now, I haven't, done a second edition of that book. I'm talking with my publisher, maybe doing a new special Ebola edition or something like that. I don't know. I just finished one book I was dealing with, and now I have to decide where to go from here.
If you've just joined us, we're with Professor Francis Boyle. This is Justice for All. He's the author of Biowarfare and Terrorism, and in his book he discusses biowarfare, also the anthrax attack in 2002, and how it appeared to Professor Boyle that was an inside job, really, and that I don't think anybody's ever been actually arrested for those anthrax attacks. You also mentioned in your book, I know there was a conspiracy theory back in 2001 around the 9/11 attacks, that there was also some sort of government conspiracy around 9/11, and that wasn't exactly everything that the media had reported it to be. And that's also in your book, in Biowarfare and Terrorism. Isn't that right? There's something that you found about 9/11 as well as the anthrax attacks that you felt was something, some type of an inside job. Isn't that right, Professor?
Well, that's correct. I mean, I'm not part of the 9/11 truth movement one way or the other. I'm just kind of busy. It seems to me that's more a work of investigative reporting and engineering and a lot of things that I really don't do. But there was one connection, which is right after I read the article in the New York Times describing the biotechnology behind the letters to Senator Leahy and Senator Daschle, who were at that time holding up the USA Patriot Act that basically set up a U.S. police state. It was very clear to me that this was super weapons grade anthrax, and that only someone working for the United States government and in a U.S. government type lab could have produced this. So I immediately called up Marion Spike Bowman, a very high-level official in the FBI who does counterterrorism work and knows of my work on biowarfare. I drafted the statute, and we were at a conference together dealing with these types of things before 9/11. And I told him my opinion that this was within a week or so after the anthrax attacks, and people were dying, and we didn't know what was going on, and Congress was shut down. That I felt that whoever was behind this, they were working for some agency of the United States government, and at that time probably either the Department of Defense or the CIA, and that that's where the FBI should look. So, he thanked me. He said he'd forward this on to the people involved in the investigation. Then I hung up the phone and I realized, hey, I have a list here of who all these people are, going back to this May 1988 Biological Defense Research Program document. So I opened up the page to everyone doing anthrax work, and I called Bowman back, and I said, look, you can get all their names right here. And I went through all the names in the laboratories where everyone was doing this dual-use biowarfare work on anthrax that was clearly weapons-related. And I said, you have all these people here. And then it was also reported in the broad Miller book, Germs, that had come out the preceding summer, that the CIA was doing biowarfare work on anthrax. I said, I don't have the names of the people of the CIA, but you could probably check with the CIA, but I'm sure you'll find your culprit on here. And Bowman then said to me, well, we're cooperating with Fort Detrick. And I said, Fort Detrick, are you serious? I said, they very well could be the problem here at Fort Detrick. You could have someone who was once on the reservation, off the reservation. You can't trust Fort Detrick. Now, I told him that. Later on, as we know, even the FBI admitted that the anthrax there did come out originally from Fort Detrick. Well, then what happened? After I had given this information to Bowman, who's extremely high-level FBI guy, and told me he was going to follow up on it, soon thereafter, the FBI went out to Ames, Iowa. And in Ames, Iowa, there's a U.S. government lab where they keep all the supplies of U.S. maintained anthrax for research, development, testing, including for biological warfare purposes. And the FBI then authorized them in Ames to destroy their entire collection of anthrax spores. Obviously, it was a cover-up. George, I was hired here originally to teach criminal law and taught it for a good, 7 years, and still do some criminal defense work myself, and I also do some prosecution for international war crimes. So it's clear to me this is a cover-up, and the FBI was covering up whoever was behind the anthrax attacks, because if you had that Ames collection, you would be able to do a DNA genetic history, tracing back the history of the Leahy-Dashiell letter back through this, with a geneticist, and figuring out precisely who had this anthrax that was used in the attack. So it seemed to me that Bowman had given my information, and knowing full well I was an expert in this area, over to other people, and they destroyed the evidence. And, destruction of evidence, obstruction of justice, I can think of some other crimes. Well, it turned out that when the investigations of 9/11 were going on, you had there Mr. Moussaoui up there in Minnesota, the alleged 20th hijacker, and the FBI agents up in Minnesota, he was trying to figure out how to fly aircraft and jet engines. So they were extremely suspicious of Mr. Moussaoui, and they sent in a request to FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., to Marion Spike Bowman, asking him to ask the FISA court, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court, to get a warrant for Mr. Moussaoui's computer, where, in theory, I guess everything would have been on, the whole 9/11 plot, probably, or a good deal of it would have been on that computer. And Bowman killed that request for a FISA subpoena from the FBI agents up there in Minnesota. He killed it. And the grounds given, of course, were total baloney, that, the FISA court would have never issued the subpoena. Well, the FISA court almost never denies a subpoena.
Yeah, they always grant. Yeah,
they always grant them.
Right.
So that was total baloney.
Right.
So when my book was going to print, I did have this connection. That the same high-level FBI agent basically put the kibosh on the FBI investigation into the Ames strain anthrax at Ames, Iowa, and also the kibosh on the Musawi computer that I'm not saying it would have, but could have led to unraveling 9/11 before it occurred.
Well, what is the status of biowarfare today? Since, I mean, we've got this Ebola that's been, as you say, you've got a theory that it's been, that the current Ebola outbreak is a result of some biowarfare experimentation. What is the status? You say $90 billion being spent on biowarfare. What exactly are we doing, as far as you know, with all of that money in terms of biowarfare? And what do we intend to do with these agents of biowarfare?
Right, George. Well, again, just to be correct, it's $79 billion from September 11 until the end of this year, and then it'll be another $4 billion next year, and then on top of that, Obama wants another $6.2 billion.
What are we doing with that money?
Right. Well, George, I hate to say it, but I believe what we have done with the money is build an offensive biowarfare industry here in the United States, which is what we used to have before the Biological Weapons Convention of, we became a party in 1974 under President Nixon. And here, if you are interested, which you probably are, there is a book by the Pulitzer Prize-winning author Seymour Martin Hersh, Chemical and Biological Warfare, 1969, Anchor Press. And that book was the first expose of the amount and the extent of the U.S. biowarfare industry before the Biological Weapons Convention, when it was perfectly lawful. You know, what one might say, it was reprehensible and dangerous. But when Hersh wrote the expose, it was perfectly lawful. But then notice it was Nixon, a conservative Republican. I would not say Nixon was a neoconservative at all, but a pretty conservative guy, who made the decision that we would join the Biological Weapons Convention. And then when he found out the CIA was still doing this stuff, ordered them to cease and desist. Well, we don't know what the CIA did or did not do. And indeed, we are still finding today different stockpiles of biological warfare agents that were apparently secreted away after Nixon gave the order and after we became parties to the Biological Weapons Convention. But it does seem to me, George, that what we've done here is basically reconstruct that offensive biowarfare industry that we used to have before Nixon and the Biological Weapons Convention. Yes, and again, I'm trying to be fair here to Nixon. Bush Sr., of course, he signed my law, so I kind of like the guy. But, and I'm not trying to, beat up on Republicans or Democrats here. Clinton, in his second term, got us back into this stuff in a big way, but nothing like what happened after 9/11/2001.
So is this biowarfare program that we're doing, is it legal? Is it in compliance with this Anti-Terrorism Act of 1989?
Well,
are we violating any?
You have to break it down, George. Okay. You have to break it down, what's going on. For example, now, before all this stuff was heavily classified, I could sort of follow what was going on. And there is a lot of legitimate research that is supposed to be done for protective, prophylactic, and peaceful purposes. The problem is, George, we spent $79 billion allegedly on this purpose, and obviously they weren't doing it, were they? Right?
Right.
We saw that with where's the $79 billion that they were supposed to be spending to protect the American people from a known biowarfare agent such as Ebola?
So we really don't know what's going on. What we have is the money is being allocated. It's according to the government and according to what information is available, it's all being used for peaceful purposes. It's all being used to, let's say, construct vaccines or whatever, or actually to cure illness. But you're saying that because it's classified behind closed doors, they're actually weaponizing biowarfare and biological DNA, genetic, that sort of thing. But we don't really know what's going on because it's classified and it's being done.
We know some of it. We know some of it because if you hit I'm on a list of that lets out contracts, and they report on contracts in this area. And if you read some of the contracts, it's clear they're doing dual-use biowarfare work. Right. And likewise, now 3 weeks ago, well, maybe it's 4 weeks ago now, the White House issued a public communique and order that all so-called gain-of-function biowarfare work should be paused immediately. And that included MERS, Middle East Respiratory System, SARS, a fairly large number of this research, development, and testing. And they called, the White House itself, if you read the White House statement, called it all, quote, dual use, unquote, which means dual use is a well-known term for being both offensive and defensive at the same time.
Right.
Well, I would say, and I have said, and I filed an affidavit there at Fort Detrick and elsewhere, that type of work is clearly illegal under the Biological Weapons Convention and also my Biological Weapons Anti-Terrorism Act of 1989. And indeed, to deal with the outsourcing and offshoring of the biological warfare work, and it as early as 1988 that I could figure out, I also drafted my Biological Weapons Anti-Terrorism Act to say quite clearly it was extraterritorial in its application. As you know, most federal statutes, criminal statutes or civil statutes, are not extraterritorial, and courts will not construe them to be extraterritorial. But to pick up this type of what I felt was illegal work, I said quite clearly in the legislation, it's in my book there, that if U.S. nationals or citizens were engaging in this work overseas, it would also violate the terms of the statute.
I'm here with Professor Francis Boyle. We've got just about a couple of minutes left, Professor. So tell our listeners the name of your book, and if you've got some parting comments, we'd like to hear them, and we'll have to go to our CBS News break. But it's been a pleasure having you here on the show with us as Professor Francis Boyle. And tell us the name of your book and how our listeners can get it, Professor.
Yeah, the book is called Biowarfare and Terrorism. And if you just go to Amazon.com, it should be on there. It's a pretty inexpensive paperback. We brought it out that way so people can read it, and you've read it. And I know we're both lawyers, but I do try to write in plain English so that normal people can understand it. There is some legal jargon in there. I guess you have to work your way through. But I think by the end of the book, you can pretty much figure out what's going on and how dangerous this work is. And I would certainly say to President Obama, we don't need another $6.2 billion on Ebola. We've already spent $79 billion on this stuff, and what have you done with it? Just give us very dangerous biological warfare agents. What happened there in West Africa could happen here in the United States with some other type of biowarfare agent. And you would not believe the different types, Middle East Respiratory Systems, SARS, every type, Lassa fever, this guy Giesbert, mating hoof and mouth disease with Ebola, this Dr. Mengele at Wisconsin, uniting influenza virus with Ebola. And, as far as we know, he very well, now that he's resurrected the Spanish flu virus, he could be trying to mate the Spanish flu virus with Ebola. the Spanish flu virus killed 20 million people all by itself. So this type of research has to be stopped, George.
Well, thank you, Professor, for being with us for the last hour.
Well, again, thank you very much, George, and always happy to talk to a fellow attorney. What type of law do you practice, by the way?
Oh, we do a lot of criminal defense and other types of litigation, so you're right up my alley.
All right, a man after my own heart.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much, Professor, for being with us, and we're going to go to a news break in just a little bit. We're at CBS News, and this is George Yates with Justice for All, and we'll be back in the next hour, and thank you for listening. We have another hour to go with our show, and we'll be right back.